Okay, good morning, everyone. The Imrei Yaakov and his Likutims referred us to a tshuva from a sefer called Shilas Tshuvos Laharotz Natan, which was written by Rav Amram Gestetner. 1 second. Rav Gestetner, I believe, was a survivor of the Shoah. Lived in Eretz Yisrael for quite some time and passed away about 10 years ago. And he wrote this tshuva in 1982. So it's worth taking a look at. And it was something that we were referred to in the notes. And it's about the following shaila. Al derech menahalei yeshiva, shekiblu rosh yeshiva laharbatzas Torah l'talmideihem. So the shaila is there are administrators of a yeshiva who hire a new Rosh Yeshiva. So, yeshivas start in many different ways. Sometimes the yeshiva starts through the vision of a great scholar, puts together a yeshiva. Sometimes that great scholar passes away. And then you have a building and you have administrators and they need to hire a new Rosh Yeshiva. Not all yeshivas run dynastically, so they hired this new Rosh Yeshiva, great scholar, charismatic figure. V'acharei ki Rosh HaYeshiva lo yachol lihishtabot im hamenahalim b'inyonei hanhagas hayeshiva beruchnius uv'gashmius. And after some time, they run into an impasse. The new Rosh Yeshiva cannot agree with the policies of the administrators, neither on spiritual affairs or on physical affairs. All right, so whatever it is, there's, disagreements happen, personalities clash, we understand that. So Piresh Rosh HaYeshiva v'lokach es hatalmidim imo. So the Rosh Yeshiva decided that he was going to leave the yeshiva and he's going to take his students with him, the ones who he's been teaching and who are his adherents. The Yasad Yeshiva La'atzma, and he set up his own yeshiva. Like I told you, Itri and Splitri, and then they have Split 3. A lot of times yeshivas have breakaways. Yeshiva Harishon and Nishra Kimat Bali Talmidim. But in this particular instance, it was bad because the original yeshiva now is left with almost 0 students because the majority, or it sounds like the vast majority, of the students have followed this Rosh Yeshiva. And so this is the Din Torah that is brought before Rav Gestetner. He says the administrators are claiming that their livelihood has been taken away from them, and their whole livelihood is doing a mitzvah of teaching Torah, and now they in the process, they have been injured in their efforts to teach Torah. V'yesh lahem chayvos rabim ketotza merechishat binyan l'sarchei hayeshiva. They have great expenses. They have to pay for the building that they had acquired, and they can't fill it now. V'rosh hayeshiva tolei ki hatalmidim tevekim bo v'yesh l'chelik rav b'chinyas hatalmidim liyeshiva. The Rosh Yeshiva's counter argument is that he is, first of all, I can't tell the students to go back to you. They want to study Torah with me. And furthermore, I accumulated a lot of these students. Before I came to the yeshiva, let's say X number of years ago, these students would never have joined the yeshiva in the first place. Umoshiv and sofer b'tzad sofer mishum yagdil Torah v'yader. And after all, don't we know that the halacha is in Shulchan Aruch that you're allowed to set up one sofer right next door to another sofer, even if it's going to cause competition. Because when it comes to Torah services, we say that there's no such thing as unfair competition. We say Yagdil Torah v'yadir. The more Torah, the more splendor and glory. Now,
so if I may ask,
yes.
I make a comment to add. This is a common problem we have today with our education system, is that every time you make a breakaway school, it's more overhead and it's a big cost on the community.
Correct.
And
It's a huge
I
drain
was
on.
thinking yesterday, this,
Yeah, there's no question. You're right, Izzy. And what usually happens is that the way these new yeshivas get started up is that you have a wealthy benefactor who creates the whole infrastructure. He puts up the building, he sets it up for X number of years, and then he leaves. And he leaves the burden now on the administrators and the middle class patrons of that institution to maintain it, and it creates a huge drain on the community. Yes, this is true. All that notwithstanding, if it means that over the course of time yeshivas will open and others will close, the attitude of Chazal was, in general, okay, but in general, there are exceptions, but the attitude was, let as many yeshivas open as possible, because ultimately that will cause the greatest amount of Torah study to transpire. Okay?
okay, so I have another question. If I have a Rebbe teaching my student, and my neighbor wants to take that Rebbe away, he's not increasing Torah study. He's just replacing one student with another student. That's whoever can
Yes,
pay the most for the Rebbe.
right. Well, that's true, but I guess the hope is that another Rebbe will be brought into town to help tutor. So I guess the argument that this Rosh Hashiva is making is, listen, guys, you want your in business endeavor to succeed, so go out, get another Rosh Hashiva, and start again, or capitulate to my demands as far as what I wanted, and that's why we fell out. We had a falling out in the first place. But in any event, your points, Izzy, are all well taken. They're valid arguments. But this is the general attitude that Chazal have, is that it's a completely free enterprise market. When it comes to Torah study, you can't put caps on yeshivas. And by the way, that seems to be the halacha when it comes to synagogues as well, which is the argument that is being made by so many of these little shtibelach that crop up all over the place now, is that the big box synagogue, like the Bayit, is losing its appeal to a lot of younger people, and they'd rather not pay membership anywhere. They'd rather have somebody put up a shingle in their basement or something like that, and have everything built for them. So anyway, there's a lot to discuss, but let's take a look and see how this text flows, and see where we get with see how far we get with it. So the first thing that Rav Gestetner does is that he gives us a significant quote from Shulchan Aruch that, and this is in Yoredeya, this is not in Choshen Mishpat. Remember, Choshen Mishpat has to do with financial and business affairs. Yoredeya has to do more with religious affairs, and so this is a halachic issue that straddles both worlds. There are features of this shaila that are business related, and there are features of the shaila that are religion related, in the sense that it involves Torah study. Okay, so there's a spiritual aspect to it where that may mitigate how we paskin the shaila. So in Yoredeya it says, in laws of Talmud Torah, melamed tinokos sheba chaveru patach bayis lelamed tinokos betzido. If you have a teacher who's already in business teaching and attracting students, and a new person comes along and sets up shop right next door to him to teach as well, either so that different students will come to him, or to lure the students of teacher A to come and study by teacher B, even though that may be the intention. Ein yecholin limchos biyado. There's no right to protest. Shenemar Hashem chafetz leman sidko yagdil Torah v'yadir. Because, as it says, Hashem desires, for the sake of his righteousness, to increase Torah and make it stronger. And whatever a community or individuals can do to strengthen Torah study should be done. And essentially, the attitude of Chazal is free market, let the best man win. Okay, is really the attitude. Let the best school win. So this is different, by the way, from what we've learned in the past few days when you've got a private tutor with a private family. And that's where the second teacher is not allowed to lure away the customer. But here, I'm just putting a shingle on my door, and I'm basically saying, I'm open to the public. Whoever would like to come is free to come. So it's a slightly different scenario, but this scenario is permitted, whereas the scenario that we were studying is not permitted. V'chein kasav Ramah Choshen Mishpat, aha, the kasav hamachaber, the rochlin hamachzirin ba'ayaros, enam kovim makom be'ir, elamidas b'nei ha'ir. And the Ramah writes the same thing in Choshen Mishpat from a business standpoint. And we'll learn more about this as we go through this chapter, that competing merchants can be blocked from coming into a community if the community says, we already have enough spice merchants or blacksmiths or whatever it is in our city, and they can block new people from coming in to offer duplicate services. The only exception is if the person is a Torah scholar, almost he gets like a carte blanche. If he's a Torah scholar, the community members do not have a right to block him from coming in. And I guess he'd have to demonstrate to the Beis Din that he's a Talmud Chacham. Now, Vahosif alav harama, and the Ramah then adds to that halacha, Duhu hadin melamdei tinokos dinan ketalmud chacham ad kan devar. And the Ramah writes, you know who else has a carte blanche? Anyone who wants to teach Torah. The city members cannot block any new teacher from coming into town. So it seems that we have an intersection of halacha, both from Yoredeya and from Choshen Mishpat, that a person who wishes to teach Torah cannot be blocked from putting up his own shingle, even if it may cause ruinous competition for his competitor. So you see that even teachers from out of town can come in and set up shop. And it's based on the Gemara. We don't have to go into that now. Now, what's interesting is that then Rav Gestetner launches into an interesting discussion as far as what will be the halacha if people come from out of town. And Rashi, he intimates that Rashi and some other Rishonim are of the opinion that if someone comes from out of town, then there is some, according to some opinions, there is a right to block them from coming in and setting up shop and putting up a shingle. And therefore he questions, I'm going to skip some of this material, that it turns out that there is some kind of controversy whether you cannot block a teacher who is local only, or whether you cannot block a teacher even when he comes and moves in from out of town. But be that as it may, we're going to skip to Os Dalid. He says, Biram afla hashitos asovrim, de b'melamed eni yochol la'akvo va'afim hu bar mevua achrita. He says, even according to those opinions, that you cannot block a teacher when he comes in from another geographic location, mikol makom matzinu gevul gam b'melamed. But we do still see limits, and this is the halacha that we've been studying, that there is a limit to how much you can cause ruination to your competitor, even when it comes to Torah teaching. But that it is forbidden for a tutor to try and solicit a balabayas to engage him in a tutoring job if he knows that the balabayas has already hired somebody else and has that person already teaching his family, unless the balabayas approaches him and says, I'm not happy with my tutor, I'm going to fire him, would you like to work for me? And the source for this is Umukaro b'Tosfos Kiddushin Divrei Maskal Ani V'Zel Shono, and he quotes Tosfos as saying that this is in the source text for this halacha, that V'od Omer Rabbeinu Meir Aviv Shel Rabbeinu Tam B'mayri B'Dog Meis Shekain Derech Hadayogim Lahasig B'Metzudos Dag Meis B'Hadogim Misasvim Sham Savim Oso Hadag. This is a case that we've seen before, where it has to do with fishermen, okay? And we learned that if a guy has set up nets with bait of dead fish, and you go upstream and you set up nets right next to him to catch the fish before they are attracted, before they can swim to his bait, so you're exploiting his efforts and enterprising off of that previous person's efforts. The kaven shezeh piresh mitzudaso tchila val yedei ma'isa sha'asa zeh misasvim sham saviv v'adaim hayachaver pores hava ki'ilu gozelo. And in that scenario, since you're sort of you're capitalizing on his efforts, it's almost like you're stealing from him, because he's the one who set up the bait to attract the fish. And therefore, the first fisherman has a right to chase you away and say, go somewhere else. And then Tosfos continues and he says, so on that basis, Rabbeinu Yitzchak extrapolated that in the same vein, a new tutor cannot approach a balabayas who already has someone working in his home as a tutor. It's almost like the fisherman who's already put his nets out and has already set up shop in that place, and he's already invested a lot in the education of his students in that house. And for you to come and try to capitalize off of that is not proper. And the first tutor can tell you to get lost and can force you to stop trying to capitalize off of his efforts. Unless the balabayas comes and tells you, I don't want that tutor anymore, I'd rather you come and work for me, then you're allowed to. And it's almost like the balabayas is like the fish. If the fish come and tell you, the second fisherman, we only want to jump into your net, we don't want to jump into the first guy's net, we don't like that fisherman, so then you're allowed to catch those fish, okay? That I guess that's the analogy that's being made. Now he says, Uva Maharit Sham Bi'er, and based on that, the Maharit, who's an early commentary also, explains that the Chamosha Piresh Aviv Sharabeinu Tam Dafilu Behefker Heicha de Tarchagam Hahud the Dag the Aser, that when it comes to even Hefker opportunities, such as catching fish in the river, that when the first person invested effort in catching fish, Hu Hadin b'Malamed Zeh Shehu Kvar Beveso Shel Balabayas. The same thing is with this tutor who's already sort of established himself in the Balabayas' home. Mistama Torach b'Rishoni Imo b'Talmud Kadeshi Yanuach b'Sof. So it's clear that this first tutor has already invested a lot of effort to try and educate the student of this household. And he's already put in a lot of effort to establish a relationship. And he wants that relationship to continue. So Yochalomer lo chazor acher achar utrach kamosha tarachti. He can say to the second tutor that's coming along, listen, buddy, I invested a lot of effort to get this balabayas to hire me, and I groomed him to convince him that he should hire a tutor for his child to teach his kid Torah. And it's not fair for you to come in after I've put in all of this effort and to try to take away what I've invested so much in. Dumya dahahu ditnan ani hamigarger berosh hazayis masha tachtav gezel mipnei darchei shalom lefi shetarcha ani lahapilan v'samach daiti alei ad kan devarav. And the Maharit compares it, like we had learned before, of a guy who climbs up a hefker olive tree and starts shaking the branches to cause the olives to fall, even though he hasn't made a kinyan, and the olives technically are still hefker that have fallen to the ground. Nonetheless, no one's allowed to take them. V'huva b'shailos of Shuvas Chasam Sofer Ayin Sham. And the Chassam Sofer brings this idea as well. So what Rav Gestetner has just demonstrated is that there's a tension here. On the one hand, it's a completely open market when it comes to setting up a shingle to say that you are now a school or you're in the business of teaching students Torah. But on the other hand, to try and actively undermine a tutor who already has an established relationship with a balabayas, to solicit that balabayas, that you're not allowed to do. So putting up a shingle, you can do, but actively soliciting, you're not allowed to do. That seems to be the point of tension, right? Umavur mizeh. So what we see from this is the afal gav demuter lamalamid liftoach beis talmud Torah b'makom malamid chaver kedei shiva tinoko sheitzel zelazeh. So what we see from here is that even though it's permitted for a new teacher to come into town to set up a shingle, even right next door to the original school, but that's only if the second teacher is not in any way benefiting from the efforts of the first teacher. If the first teacher had worked very hard to create an environment where children would want to come and learn Torah, and after years of establishing the whole concept of Talmud Torah in this small community, and he's built up a nice little enterprise where he's got a couple of hundred kids in his school, all of a sudden another guy, and before he came to town, no one was sending their kids to Talmud Torah. No one was sending their kids to yeshiva. And he came along and set something up and worked hard and created this whole new zeitgeist in the Jewish community that people should send their kids to school. For this second guy to come along and put up a shingle in that scenario, that's problematic. He says it would only be permitted for the second guy to put up a shingle is without the efforts of the first guy, the second teacher would attract students. But in a scenario where it was only through the efforts of the first teacher who set up the whole educational concept in the community in the first place, that the second person has a chance to capitalize off of that whole new paradigm change that this first teacher brought into the community, so then it would be usher for him to set up a new shingle. And this is the line of demarcation. Are you second guy capitalizing off of my efforts or not? If you can make the argument that the market is so robust right now that your school needs a second school to help take off the burden of all of these new families that want to send their children to yeshiva, and there's plenty of room in the market to support both yeshivas, and even if you were closed, I would still be able to open up my yeshiva and attract all of these students. And had you never come in, that would have happened. So then, fine, that's Mela, that's one thing. But if it can be assessed with accuracy that you're only able to open up your second place because of the efforts that I put in for years into my first place, so then that would not be permitted unless the first place grants permission. Uledivrei hamaharit zal hanal, af im hayu tinokas halalu boim lamalamid hasheni biladei harishon, el sharishon amal aleihem vehela b'torah ad shein tzorach lahatriach atzmi mom kevarishona. He says, according to what the Maharit wrote, even if by the guy setting up his second shingle, the children would come, even if there was no first yeshiva, but the first yeshiva really, or the educator from that first yeshiva worked with them and groomed them so that it removes the need for the second teacher to do all of that effort to, what's the word I'm looking for, to cultivate, that's the word I'm looking for, to cultivate the students and attract them to him. He says, Ubo Hasheni v'notel marishon hareza aser, then that's going to be aser if the second teacher just chaps those students away from the first yeshiva. Ki asr lahasheni ligzol amalo shel rishon. Because in all circumstances, even when it comes to Torah education, a second school or a second educator cannot exploit the efforts of the first at that first one's expense. The afal gav de moshiv sofer bitzad sofer mishum kina sofer tar b'chalchma. So he says, so why then does the Shulchan Aruch say that one scribe can set up shop right next door to another scribe? And because you want Torah study to increase, he says there it's different. He says, Hainu rak she'eno tzarach lachshosh mishum yor luminaso shel chavero. He says that attitude is based on all that halach is telling you is that you don't have to fear that by setting up your shingle, you're going to be decreasing the parnasa of your competitor. That the rabbi said you should never worry about when you're offering spiritual services to a community. But va'af shegor minias revach lechavera, and that's true even if you're causing him to make less money off of new customers. But that's quite different from what we're talking about over here. But if you're actively taking away his investment, his efforts that he'd put in to cultivate an entire community of people to come and study Torah, that's going to be asr. And just because the rabbis want there to be an increase in Torah study, that's not enough of an argument. Delo hitiru lamalamed liftoach bayis lilmod Torah lamed Torah elo lebar mavua denafshe velo lebar mavua achritoch mosheveinu lael. He says, and in addition to what I've just argued, we've already demonstrated that there are a number of poskim who don't allow a teacher to come in or a school to come in from out of town and to create new competition in a community that only previously has won. And therefore you see also, according to those commentaries, that it's not a complete carte blanche to allow a completely open market. There are certain parameters. And certainly when the second person is capitalizing on the investments and the cultivations that the first person put into it, that's certainly going to be asr. Now, is it a fine line? Sure, because in a real life situation, who's to say which one of these families is a product of the first yeshiva's cultivation, and which of these families could you argue that they, even without the efforts of the first yeshiva, they would have still taken advantage of the second yeshiva's services. So that's going to be the subject, getting back to the real life scenario of this yeshiva, which now is in debt because all of their students are gone. They no longer have parents paying tuition because they've all gone to the new Rosh Yeshiva. How do we apply what we've just learned in theory and apply that to a real life situation? So before we launch into that, any questions or comments at this point?
Yeah, Rabbi, I'd like to just bring it back to the whole scenario of the shuls. And as I've seen in Thornhill, being here for many years, how it's evolved. And I think to the detriment of some of the shuls, as all these shtibel have opened up, they've hurt other shuls. And it's also, it can cause sort of some bad will, or not really bad will, but some tension between Rebbeim. I've sat on boards and I've seen scenarios where it happen, and it's very hurtful when you see members leaving and members who you've cultivated and worked with, and then all of a sudden they leave and go to another place. It's a free enterprise, but I think there should be some parameters where how close a shul can open to one another and other things, because it does cause some tension and some bad will, I think.
Your argument is well taken. It's passionately and effectively given, your argument, Ron, and I concur. Listen, as a rabbi of a synagogue that has seen a number of its members poached to go elsewhere for various different reasons, I certainly sympathize with your argument. But at the end of the day, and as I actually mentioned this to somebody who was complaining to me because he was dissatisfied with a certain service that our shul was giving, and I felt that he was inappropriately lodging that complaint, I said to him, it's a free market. I'm the last person to tell you that you have to stay at our shul. Look at all the other offerings there are. If you feel that your spiritual needs are not being met in our institution, you are welcome to avail yourself of all of the other spiritual establishments that can offer you perhaps what you are looking for. Now, that was, in my case, I was looking to tell the guy to tell him off because he was acting inappropriately, in my opinion. But I should say that it is hurtful, especially because the shul has overhead. They've got to pay my salary and the salary of other people and the whole maintenance of the building. And it hurts every time a member leaves because he says, well, I don't have to pay membership. I can either pay a couple of grand and more in donations to the synagogue for an annual membership, or I can go to the shtibel down the road. They don't charge me anything. And once in a while, if I want to pay some money, I'll sponsor Kiddush. I'll give a few dollars here, a few dollars there. And it's a bargain. And it's very, very difficult to compete with that unless the people who are members of the shul recognize that they are receiving a service that is unique and that cannot be replicated in the shtibel, right? And ultimately, that's what we've come to the realization of in the Wild West of these Canadian provinces in the United States, which is that in the Wild West, in the Western Hemisphere, that's generally the way things are done. And actually, the halacha backs up that kind of protocol when it comes to Torah study and spiritual issues. Because the truth of the matter is that when it comes to spiritual affairs, we want people to maximize their opportunity of availing themselves of spiritual services. And that way, the Torah and Judaism will be increased, and the net gain to the preservation of Yiddishkeit will be that Judaism will be preserved, even though certain shuls may not survive. But Yiddishkeit, I guess the goal is that Yiddishkeit should be preserved at all costs. There's much more to discuss, but we're out of time, and we'll continue this tshuva in Yirtzeh Hashem tomorrow. Okay, I hope everyone's finding this of interest. I'm gonna assume that the silence is not based on boredom. Okay, all right. So everybody have a great day, and we'll see you in Yirtzeh Hashem later. Okay.